I was scrolling through the interwebs and I came across this image that said Mouse Utopia, Heaven or Hell. And I said, that sounds intriguing. So now I'm looking into it. Let's see if we can just start off by getting the basics. Mouse Utopia, Science History Institute. Mouse Heaven or Hell, and this was the picture I saw that piqued my interest. So officially the colony was called the Mortality-Inhibiting Environment for Mice, trying to keep that mortality inhibited. Looks like it was run by this guy, John Calhoun. This was in 1968, so a long time ago. And the mice were in a large pen, 4.5-foot cube, which that looks bigger than 4.5 feet to me, but I don't know. There was plenty of food, water, perfect climate, reams of paper, 256 separate apartments. He also screened them to get rid of disease. There were no predators. So the goal isn't to make them live forever. It's to help them to live to an extraordinarily old age based on having no cares. Looks like this was the 25th time he had done this. So I guess that's why it says Universe 25, the 25th mouse universe. It looks like he's been doing this for a long time. Did it when he was a kid, growing up in Tennessee. So it looks like he first started, he introduced a few pups, and then 55 days later, the population had doubled. Every 55 days after the first generation, the population was doubling. So 10 pups, 20 pups, 40 pups, 80 pups. That's real fast. And the population peaked at 2,200 mice. Right off the bat, though, it looks like they started running into problems because in the wild, most of the time, the juveniles are getting eaten by predators, or they're dying because they're cold, or there's disease or sickness or whatever. But because there was none of that in the Utopia, there was way more than there should have been. And this started causing problems with the rodent social hierarchies. So the alpha males are controlling the harems, and there's these loser mice that lose in a fight where they're fighting over harems and fighting over females. But then normally in the outside world, the mouse that lost the fight would run off somewhere else and hide, but they can't do that in this mouse utopia. So what they did is they just started congregating in the center of the pen. All of these dropout mice. They're all messed up, cuts and ugly scars, and every so often they just start going at it. All of the mice in the center of the pen just start brawling for what seemed to be no reason. They're just going at it. And then after that, because there's so many males that survived to adulthood, just because you as your own mouse, alpha male mouse, have your harem doesn't mean that there's not a bunch of other alpha male mice that also want that harem. So the alpha males are defending their nest, but they get tired because they're spending so much time defending it. And then the nursing females, who usually would just be able to take care of their kids, their pups, are getting invaded by these rogue males. And the stressed out mothers are either trampling their pups in the nest because they're having to fight, or they're getting so stressed out that they're kicking their pups out early before they've actually matured. This is something out of a dystopia, a social apocalypse movie. So these mice that are getting kicked out of the nest too early, or not being raised properly by the mothers who are just fighting all the time, are not developing healthy social bonds, and they're not interacting well with the other mice. And so once they get to adulthood, their social interactions are all messed up. So the girls that are all messed up are just hiding themselves away and not really paying attention to anyone. Definitely not having more pups. And the males that are all messed up are just grooming themselves all day. He started calling them the beautiful ones. They would just sit in a corner and take care of themselves and just clean themselves all day so that they looked really nice, and they wouldn't care about any kind of social interaction or getting girls or making friends. And so he noticed that this behavior of not interacting socially and just cleaning yourself or hiding yourself away in one of the apartments to just sit there and not do anything, he called this the behavioral sink. He felt like it was spreading from mouse to mouse. So it looks like because all of these maladjusted mice are not having sex and not having pups, that's lowering the birth rate. So the population begins to just drop. Eventually new births stop altogether. And then by 73, it's 5 years after the experiment started, none of the mice survived. Literally all of them died, which is insane. Let's see if there's some footage of these mice. This video is acting weird. I'm just going to search it up on YouTube. Is that the same one? Sean Lynch. Okay. There's that John Calhoun guy. Oh, and there's the 4.5 by 4.5 box. It looks like pen. There's shreds of paper on the ground that they're using for nesting, and it looks like there's little mice in their nesting boxes. And there's like the wire mesh that they have so they can climb up and down all over the place if they need to. I don't understand what these lines are on the ground here. I thought they were like little walls to like separate things, but it looks like they're just lines. I'm not sure why he had put those in there. It also looks like these mice are so comfortable with this guy. Look at all those mice. That's a lot of mice. And it looks like there's water stuff at the top for them to drink. Mice are getting out of control. So many of them. Looks like here they're fighting, maybe? Fighting, brawl. Oh, that one's all bloody. Yikes. Oh, here's a shot of their tails being all bitten up. Oh, yikes. Those are some bloody mice. Ooh. Here are the researchers kind of looking into it. Oh, it looks like, I think they did this study with the rats. Oh, here we go. Here's some rats. And they're pulling them out to... Those look dead. That's a dead mouse. Or dead rat. Oh, and here's a rat one with the apartments for the rats to live in. I don't know. Does it talk about what the findings were on this one? I feel like it just kind of like makes mention of it. I haven't heard anything. Oh, they've got like a little digital thing there to count the mice to see how many are passing through. It looks like a large part of this study is being like compared to overpopulation, so that like human cities are overpopulated, they're overcrowded. Ooh, this one is 38 minutes long. Let's look and see if we can get some cool footage of mice. There he is standing. There's no way that's 4.5 feet tall. What the heck is he talking about? So there's like the water things up along the top there. Animal Center near Washington. Here's more footage of them climbing. Why is this footage such a different color? He makes a point here about like tribes in somewhere. Some hunter-gatherer tribe that was kind of like sectioned off. The government told them that they couldn't leave, or maybe they just wanted to stay together as a tribe, and the population got like super dense. And he's kind of comparing that situation to the mouse situation, it seems like. Okay, back to the science history article. So it looks like he starts going into like the reactions. Like this part of the article is about the reactions. Let's hold off on looking at the reactions right now. Let's go back and look, see if we can find the original publication. Mortality-Inhibiting Environment for Mice. Let's see if we can find that. Let's see, this looks death squared, the explosive growth. It says it's by the guy. Let's look at this one. Although this looks like it's like an article in a larger work. Volume 66. I don't know what's going on here. It looks like the article starts here. Oh well, let's try it out. So right off the bat, he's talking about like how he's using this, or he's kind of like drawing lessons from the book of Revelations in the Bible and the apocalypse, and like the horses, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Kind of quotes a little bit from it. So the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse would be sword, famine, pestilence, and wild beasts. And he's talking about these as like, these are the 4 things that will like cut a person's life short prematurely. He calls this the second death because that's what it says in the Bible. It's like the first death and the second death. Here's that picture again. Here's where he talks about the behavioral sink. The learned need for proximity to others as a secondary reinforcer gains dominance over the primary need, in this case for food. I'm not sure I understand this sentence. The learned need for proximity to others as a secondary reinforcer at a resource site gains dominance over the primary need, in this case food. Yeah, I'm not sure what that means. Okay, so he's got 5 mortality factors here, I think. So emigration would be the sword, because he's not that many animals die by the sword in the wild. So he's saying that emigration is like kind of like if you move to a different place and then the people there reject you and fight you, would be one cause of death. And then resource shortage is another one, classically, in inclement weather, exposure to the elements and whatnot, disease, and predation are his comparisons to the horsemen of the apocalypse. I think predation would be what? Wild beasts, and disease would be pestilence, and resource shortage would be famine. So here he talks about how he's controlling for these mortality factors. Like he put them in a closed universe so they can't leave to go somewhere else and get killed by some other animal. He made the resources supra available. Everybody's got food, everybody's got water, everybody's got a house to live in. There's no inclement weather. Yeah, there's no inclement weather. Temperature stays the same, 70 to 90. There's no disease because he controlled for that when he was putting them in. So if there's like none when you put them in initially, there shouldn't be any that like crops up, hopefully. And there's no predators. I love how all of these other ones are like given super detailed explanations. And then this one, predation, is no predators were present. Which like makes sense. You don't need to elaborate if you didn't put any in. It's just funny how it's just this single tiny sentence. The mice did die, obviously, but he doesn't say why. He says some mortality did occur, but it didn't become a significant factor until most of them were dying from old age. Most of the mice lived to around 800 days, which is equivalent to 80 years for humans. So it looks like in the early days, there was 8 mice and there was considerable social turmoil. It took them kind of a while to adjust to the cage life. Here's the population history. This looks like it started off with like 20. So here's where after they all got used to each other, population started doubling every 55 days, like they said in the article. So it's like 20, 40, 80, 163, 26, 20, down. And then such a crazy expansion rate. So it looks like he's breaking them up into different phases, each phase of the experiment. So this would be, the first phase was phase A, where they were getting adjusted, and then the rapid growth phase is phase B. Oh, but for some reason, the decreased doubling time got a lot longer, 145 days versus 55 days. That's a very significant jump. That's almost 3 times as long. Then here in this graph, he's got like the preference of the mice feeding at the different food hoppers. So these little black squares are the food hoppers around the enclosure, and the number of brood groups, it looks like. Wait, no. So the numbers on the inside are the number of brood groups that are having pups in those cells, and these are the number of pups that were born there. So it's kind of funny. You can see like there's like social congregations happening, and like very few on this side and a ton on this side. And this is a chart showing like the number of pup production. So like the number of pups per brood group was super high. The degree of dominance of the territorial males associated with the brood group, I'm not sure. Something. Looks like day 315. The population starts growing at a much slower rate. The excess people are finding no social niches to emigrate. Males who failed the social testing and like physical altercations withdrew physically and psychologically. They were very inactive and aggregated in large pools in the center of the universe. They no longer initiated interaction with their established associates. It looks like that initial article did a pretty good job of detailing most of the important parts of this. Looks like the females kind of suffered as well as the males, like the female counterparts of the males that lost in the attacks would withdraw to higher level boxes that were less preferred by females with litters. Here's where it talks about how the territorial males, their ability to continue territorial defense declined because they were fighting so much, the extreme demands. Here's where it talks about the nursing females eventually did become aggressive because the males weren't able to take care of them. They started generalizing their aggression towards their own young. Yikes. The females started reabsorbing their own fetuses. Maternal behavior is disrupted. Females are transporting their young to sites and losing them in the process, abandoning them. Yikes. So phase C is the abrupt decline in the population, and by the end of phase C, there had been a death of societal organization. Yikes. And then he goes on to talk about how the population declines super fast. So it looks like the new mice that were like trying to get some social interaction were mechanically disrupted by passage of other mice. So there's just so many mice that anytime they're like trying to hang out, it's like too many mice are like physically getting in the way of the person I'm trying to talk to. Here's where he talks about the ones he dubbed the beautiful ones. He never engaged in sexual approaches, never engaged in fighting. They basically just ate, drank, slept, and groomed. They weren't interacting with their peers at all. Whoa, this is crazy. So they took some of these male mice that were like, had been shunned or had been like maladjusted, and they put them into new universes at very low densities, and they still couldn't figure out how to interact. They like didn't redevelop their social instincts. Even if they put them in with adequate sex partners of like that had matured in uncrowded conditions. So even if they put them in with like girls that had not been grown up in horrible conditions, they still couldn't figure it out. Like their social instincts are just gone. Honestly, this kind of reads like an excerpt out of like some apocalyptic novel where the doctor is like keeping notes on like the experiments he's running. It's like, oh, this happened and then this happened. It's kind of how this feels. There's a conclusion. But he says for animals so complex as man, there's no logical reason why a comparable sequence of events should not also lead to species extinction. Is this an overcrowding argument? I don't know. It seems like a lot of people want to make the comparison to overcrowding. I think maybe he's also, but this is a confusing sentence. If opportunities for role fulfillment fall short of the demand by those capable of filling the roles and having expectancies to do so, only violence and disruption of social organizations can follow. So it doesn't sound like he's making the point that the density is what messed things up. It's like the role fulfillment is what was lost, and that's what led to the problems. Anyways, that's the end. Looks like there's a little Q&A that happened after too. The chairman wants to know about pollution or like animal remains, feces and urine and whatever. He said they cleaned it up every 6 weeks or 2 months, but nothing was ever sterilized and it didn't really affect anything that much. Dead bodies were eventually removed for examination. I'm out of time to keep looking into this, but I'll come back and look into more of these Q&As when I come back tomorrow. And I'm back. This guy randomly asks about the chart illustrating pupping rates, and that it's like, oh, it's in the north and east. Does that have some significance? Are the mice like directionally minded? And Calhoun's like, maybe, but it was probably just some fluke thing, like airflow was better in that corner. This guy wanted to know if the color coding had affected their behavior at all. And Calhoun's like, maybe a tiny bit, but movement and body posture and a lot of other factors he felt like were more important than color. So apparently it was said somewhere that Calhoun had suggested that by 1984, men was going to be as crowded as the mice experiment. And they make this point that parts of London have been super crowded for 40 years, and they did it well enough. There was never any problems when there was extreme crowding in London and other enclosed communities. And Calhoun says that 1984 was not the year when ultimate density would be obtained, but a date beyond which the opportunity for decision making might be quickly lost. So he's basically like, we need to do something by 1984. Otherwise, things are going to go downhill, in his opinion. But he also makes this case that, like he kind of made at the end of in the conclusion, that the density is not the major factor. It's the rate and quality of social interaction. So once the rate and quality of social interaction goes down and stops being a factor, then that's when things really start to be a problem. He feels like one of the main reasons for humans being able to handle crowded areas is because they have conceptual space. They have the ability to move into their brains and conceptualize things. The chairman responds and says that Hong Kong is another good example of people living in super dense areas and still being happy. This guy asks if there was any mutations that had happened in the mice during the experiment. Calhoun says there was a couple mice who exhibited strange behavior, but it was probably something more of an infection, not a mutation. Anyways, that's the end of this study and the Q&A. Let's go back to the original science history article. This one. Okay, so this is the end of all the juicy details of the actual experiment in this article. And then he starts talking about the interpretations that people took for this experiment. So the experiment ended in 68, and there was people who started referencing it in that same year. And this guy's book, or this guy's essay, let me see if I can find this. Oh, Rotten Gotham, Sliding Down into Behavioral Sink. No, this is just an analysis. Try this one. Yeah, no, it's a summary, and then it's not going to let me download the original article, quote unquote original article. Hopefully this will be it. So this is some book called The Pump House Gang by Tom Wolfe. Let's try searching up behavioral sink. What page is that? Let me just try searching Gotham. Okay, this looks promising. What the heck is going on here? Looks like here's where he mentions the behavioral sink in terms of ethology. So he's basically just using it. I'm not going to read this whole essay. Yeah, he's just talking about overcrowding, and he kind of just mentions it offhandedly. All right, this is a dead end. Let's keep looking at the other things. He talks about interpretations. So there was somebody who published a book called The Population Bomb, Predicting Imminent Starvation and Population Crashes. He makes mention of Soylent Green, which I don't know if you've seen the movie. I haven't seen it, but I've definitely heard about it, where the humans that die are turned into the food slurry that everybody's eating, and they don't find out. They think it's just a healthy thing. Anyways, let's see if we can find the population bomb. The population bomb. The population bomb. While you are reading these words, 3 children are dying of starvation and 24 more babies are being born. Holy crap. This guy's not an alarmist. Overpopulation is now the dominant problem of all our personal, national, and international planning. Whew, okay. When was this published? 68. So the same year the study was done. So it seems like the overpopulation or overcrowding was a pretty big concern in the end of the 60s, early 70s. More recently, there's been population booms because of drops in infant mortality, but human birth rates have dropped in many developed countries. Right. I keep hearing about this. Below replacement levels. I keep hearing about these replacement levels. And young people in those places have reportedly lost interest in sex. And in this one, behavioral biologists echoed eugenics movements. So because there was no culling of the weak and unfit to breed, mutational meltdowns is what led to the widespread mouse demise. Man, my eye is freaking out on me. The researchers argued that the brain is already susceptible to mutations because it's so intricate, because so many of our genes influence brain function. I'm sorry, what? Do you know how brains work? This is where he talks about how women are supposedly falling into behavioral sink by maladaptive behaviors, choosing not to have children, and destroying their own genetic interests. He calls these people political agitators, which I feel like is probably a good description, because these are the kind of people that like to stir stuff up. Loss of traditional gender roles. Okay, he's making too many different points that I would like to look into. Apparently, people who advocate for both birth control have told Calhoun's story. Some people are seeing the mice collapse as like a one percenters wealth inequality thing, where they're blaming the social dysfunction, a few aggressive males holding precious resources. That makes no sense. There was so many resources in that experiment. Unfair distribution problem. Yeah, no. Did you read the study? So the more I read this guy's article, the more I'm like, this guy knows what's up. This guy has a good perspective. He's like, the more you read these contradictory interpretations, it's hard to escape the suspicion that personal or political views rather than objective inquiry are driving these critics' outlooks. And I'm like, yes, that is correct. Good on you for noticing it and pointing it out, guy. So he kind of just talks about why like the things that people said were kind of contradicting each other, or like it's pretty easy to like look at these interpretations of this experiment and be like, that's not actually what happened, or that doesn't really make sense. Here he references an earlier experiment that the Calhoun guy did, where this one was an earlier experiment where, because people were saying that the mice were getting dumber as more mice were kind of bred in or were born in, but these mice in this one started digging holes in the floor because there was a dirt floor, and then like the mice that needed something to do were like helping to shovel out the loose dirt so they could dig tunnels. But then there were some mice that were like clumping up the balls of dirt and like putting them all into one large ball and then rolling that out the tunnel, which is like not normal. I think they were actually rats in this experiment, not normal rat behavior. So he was saying that like separation from the rat herd can lead to innovation or something. And apparently this kind of thing, so Calhoun actually began building other utopias to encourage like physical and mental stimulation. And this is what actually inspired the Rats of Nimh, Miss Frisbee and the Rats of Nimh, the movie, if you've seen it, which was super old and traumatized me as a child. Anyways, he goes on and makes a couple other interpretations, but he says ultimately Calhoun's work functions like a Rorschach blot. You see what you want to see. And he also makes the point, which I think is very valid, is that mice are not people. Mice are like alive and semi-intelligent, and they have things that they go through, but people are significantly more complicated. So it's definitely not a one-to-one comparison. Anyways, let's look into, so I have a couple questions. Let me write them down. Okay, number one. He mentioned that the birth rates have been dropping below replacement levels, so I want to know what that is. There was also he also made the case that somebody was arguing that the mouse experiment was like the socialist welfare state where everybody was just given whatever they want and they fell victim to like boredom and like they were driven crazy by not having any purpose or whatever. Let's look into that. The parable of the socialist welfare state. And he also made mention of like the one percenters who are just hoarding resources. All right, let's start off with birth rates. Although, you know what, now that I'm looking at these, I feel like this one is going to be semi-easy to verify empirically, but these two are just going to be like a freaking nightmare to try and verify or look into. So I think I'm just going to look into this one for now. Also, it's worth noting that this study was published in 68, or 73 is when it was put in this book, but that was 52 years ago, if my math is correct. This was 52 years ago. So a lot has changed since then. Okay. Birth rates dropping below replacement levels. Let's start here. Dramatic declines in population and global fertility rates. Right off the bat, they're making some intense claims. By 2050, it's doing some weird thing when I highlight it, so I'm just going to point it out. By 2050, over 3/4 of countries will not have enough fertility rates to sustain population size over time. This will increase to 97% of countries by 2100. Authors warn that national governments must plan for emerging threats to economies, food securities, basically everything. Transform the way we live. Okay, so apparently the big problem is high fertility rates in low-income countries, like namely Western and Eastern Sub-Saharan Africa, and low fertility in higher income countries. They reference this study right here. You know I love a good study. I'm out of time right now waiting for this stinking thing to load, so I'll come back tomorrow and we can keep going. Okay, I'm back. Finally got this study to load. Global fertility in 204 countries and territories. So I was reading through this background and like methods, and I was thoroughly lost. So, and the findings as well. But the interpretation seemed fairly straightforward. Fertility is declining globally, with rates in more than half of all countries and territories in 2021 below replacement level. Only a small number of countries experienced even a slight fertility rebound after their lowest observed rate, with none actually reaching the replacement level. So they're saying the same thing, that the greatest proportion of live births is occurring in the lowest income countries. These changes will have far-reaching economic and societal consequences due to aging populations, blah, blah, blah. Same thing as the other one. I don't know if it's worth pointing out or relevant or not, but this study was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation only, or they're the only listed funders, so take that as you will. All right, so they're saying once again that none are reaching replacement level. There's that replacement level again. Let's dwell on that for a second. What does replacement levels mean in the context of fertility? Let's try this one. Replacement level fertility and future population growth. Technical term which seems almost self-explanatory. It does seem almost self-explanatory. It's complicated though. Okay, so replacement level fertility is the level of fertility at which a population exactly replaces itself from one generation to the next. People being born, people dying, population stays the same, right? So in developed countries, replacement level fertility can be taken as requiring an average of 2.1 children per woman. Interesting. I thought it was per couple, but that makes more sense if it's harder to measure couples than it is to measure women. 2.1. So this is the number I've heard kind of bandied about by people and said you need every woman to be giving birth to at least 2 and a little bit more children for the population to be sustained. If it was in a contained environment, I think is the part that makes it complicated. If it's a country with high infant and child mortality rates, though, the average number may need to be much higher, which makes sense. Replacement level fertility will lead to zero population growth only if mortality rates remain constant and migration has no effect. So if the population is contained and if mortality rates remain constant, there's no wars or famine or pestilence or whatever. Apparently there's some momentum from past and current demographics as well that might take several generations to work themselves out. This is saying, though, that it follows that fertility level itself is not a reliable guide to population growth. It's better to examine actual or projected population growth directly than subsequently relating such growth to fertility, morality, or migration. I don't understand this sentence. Okay, this is kind of a crazy thing. So apparently, for all birth cohorts in the UK from 1950 onwards, fertility will, or already has been, below replacement levels, right? So since 1950, the last 75 years, it's been below replacement levels. So they're averaging less than 2.1 children per woman, but population size is projected to grow until approximately 2027. I want to know how and why. I'm assuming it must have to do with immigration, because I know the UK gets a lot of immigrants from other countries. But the problem is that they keep saying that this is going to happen to 92% of countries or whatever. So if it's happening to everyone, where are the people going to immigrate from? Real life questions. Back to here. So this article, oh my God, it's so annoying. So this article is saying that by the year 2100, only 6 countries will have fertility rates above the replacement levels. There's that number again, 2.1 births per female. Apparently in South Korea and Serbia, the rate is less than 1.1 child for every female, which is real bad, because if you need a man and a woman to create a child, but the woman is only producing 1 child, that sounds like bad news. But apparently in sub-Saharan African countries, they're having 4 children per female average. So the 6 countries that are projected to keep their replacement levels up are Samoa, Somalia, Tonga, Niger, Chad, and Tajikistan. Dang, in 13 countries, in these countries right here, in 13 countries listed right here, the rates are even predicted to fall below 1 child per female. Dang, that sounds like bad news. So I'm not going to say that I don't believe what this is saying, but also with how that last publication was saying that it's complicated, I'm feeling like the number of sensational claims that this article is making, it's either they're trying to sound the alarm bells really loudly, or they're making a cash grab to get funding or something. Because these are some pretty intense claims they're making. Also, I'm not sure that I really understand the urgency. How difficult would it be to kind of turn this around? If it's, you tell everybody in the population, hey, all you women out there are only averaging 1 child per female. It needs to be 2. Get up the birth rate or our population is going to not exist anymore. Would that not, could you not kind of just or encourage or nudge women into having more children? Maybe? Okay, it looks like they kind of address this here. Social policies. Very frustrating that I can't highlight in this article for some reason. Social policies to improve birth rates such as enhanced parental leave, free childcare, financial incentives, extra employment rights may provide a small boost to fertility rates, but most countries will remain below replacement levels. So I guess there's like a lot of reasons why people are not choosing not to have children, because it's a choice not to have children, right? It's not like is it a choice? Is it because people can't find partners? What are the reasons? Also, not to trivialize this at all, but like if we go back to that original article, this was written in like just before the 70s, and that was a long time ago. And would it not have made sense that like if these people were like super stressed about it, and could they not have just like looked forward in time a little bit and been like, oh, contraceptives are going to help out a lot, advances in medicine are going to help out a lot, changing in culture is going to like make people want to have less children. Like, could they not have just done a little bit of looking into the future to kind of guess at what was going to happen? Is that not what we're also doing? Kind of like fear mongering just to say the world is going to burn, but in reality, life is a lot more complicated and it will work itself out? Maybe I'm just crazy. Okay, so changing course a little bit, there was, I think somewhere in this article, it talks about how the Calhoun guy did some more experiments where he was keeping the rodents like physically and mentally nourished, which inspired the children's book Miss Frisby and the Rats of Nimh, wherein a group of rats escaped from a colony designed to stimulate their intelligence. Like, where is this experiment? I want to see this one. The rat experiment that inspired Mrs. Frisby and the Secret of Nimh. Let's see. This one? No, it's a book. This one? No, also that same book. Let's try searching something else. John B. Calhoun's experiment to stimulate mice mentally and physically. Is it this? No, this is just more on the Universe 25. Escaping the Laboratory. The rodent experiments of John B. Calhoun. This is just another expose on the thing. We'll see what it has to say, though. This guy keeps citing that there were rats. 5,000 rats. Why is he talking about rats? It was mice in the experiment. Let's see. He's referencing this paper, Population Density and Social Pathology in Scientific America. Let's see if we can find that. Let's try this one. Population Density and Social Pathology by John B. Calhoun. Haha, here we go. This one is interesting, but it's very long. I don't really want to read an entire another study. Let me see if there's anything interesting here, though. It looks like it's pretty similar to... Well, here's that picture that they pulled, that other article. Looks like it's very similar to the Universe 25 one. Here's something interesting, though. This little box right here is a water fountain, and the fountain was operated by pressing a lever, so the rats would only drink if other animals were present, but it looks like they had to work together, so like one rat had to press the lever, and another rat could drink, maybe? Maybe this is the mental stimulation he was talking about? Anyways, I think that might be it for this video. It was interesting. I had a good time looking into this. Definitely very sensational studies and subject material, so I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.